and go to Cleveland, Ohio, where we're joined remote by David Forte.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for being with us.
Glad to be here.
David Forte is a law professor. Professor Forte, you are also an advisor. You have been an advisor to the Bush administration on Islam, on how the administration should react and how they should deal with it and the kinds of words they should use. Did you recognize any of your thoughts or your words in the president's speech on September 20th?
Yes, I did. There were a few phrases that I had written academically and had found their way into the administration's processes of developing the speech. But the policy we saw that the president put out was his from the beginning. And my academic writings in describing the extremism of bin Laden and the others as being almost external to the traditions of Islam, my academic writings helped validate the policy. But of course, that was a fantastic speech, one of the great American president speeches of all time, of all our history. And the part that he spoke about regarding Islam, though vital to the entire policy, was just one part of it. It really galvanized the American people and gave us hope, don't you think?
Tell us a little bit about the difference between the kind of Islam that is practiced or advocated by Osama bin Laden and more mainstream Islam.
Well, what Osama bin Laden is actually attempting to do is to change Islam itself. My research told me that there was an early heresy within Islam called the Hagites, who revolted against both the groups that became the Sunnis later and the Shiites. And the Hagites' policy was that if anyone didn't agree with them particularly and their very rigid view of Islam, they were automatically an apostate and should and would be killed. And unlike the tradition of even the law of war in the other branches of Islam, the Hagites made war on all civilians, including women, who did not agree with their point of view of Islam. They were fought against by both the Sunnis and Shiites. They even assassinated the fourth Caliph, Ali, and were finally put down 2 centuries later, but they committed some frightful massacres. And then when I looked at bin Laden and his plans, his view of Islam seemed to me to be the same as the Hagites, a replication of it. He is making war on civilians, and he's attempting to turn Islam into a kind of Hagite rigor where blood and execution seem to be the primary mechanisms of spreading the faith. For example, if he's been behind the Taliban almost from the start. And the Taliban today is what his vision of Islam is for the future. And should that occur, Islam would fall under a dark age like it's never received before. And most Muslims realize that that's quite foreign to their tradition and want to have no part of it.
Well, there is supposedly an injunction in the Quran, I think I've read, and you tell me if I'm right or I'm wrong, against the sort of killing, against the sort of indiscriminate killing at the very least that's advocated and practiced by Osama bin Laden and terrorists.
That's correct. In my study of Islamic law, I've never come across a prescription that would permit the killing of innocent civilians in any circumstances, the direct killing of innocent civilians, which he seems to directly champion and target, as bin Laden does.
How does he reconcile that with the Quran then?
You know, at a certain point, you have to realize that terrorists develop their own lust for power, and the reconciliation with the Quran and Islam becomes secondary to his program. I have not seen him attempt to characterize it as Quranic, and I don't think he could.
And now, is there condemnation of Osama bin Laden coming from other Muslims, in your view, from what you've seen, either from moderate Arab governments or from within this country?
Both. I think one of the geniuses of President Bush is that once he drew that bright line between the varying traditions of Islam, and Islam has multiple traditions, and what bin Laden observed, so many Muslims could repair to that standard, and they have. Even conservative, traditional Islamic regimes like Saudi Arabia have. And since the pieces have appeared in the newspapers regarding my views, I received a number of emails, and every Muslim has written me, has agreed that the President's policy exactly typifies the kind of tolerance and respect for Islam, and that bin Laden's is quite outside the traditions of Islam.
David Forte is a law professor in Cleveland at Cleveland State University. He's also an advisor to the Bush administration on Islam and has been influential in shaping the administration's rhetoric and their policies. And our first call for him comes from Long Beach, California. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Yes, I wanted to say this has really opened my eyes as far as religion is concerned. In Christianity here in America, we've got a variety of different beliefs and everything. And one thing good that's come out of this is I've been able to understand Islamic religion a little bit more than I have before. When the attack occurred, of course, in the shock that I was in, even my own friends that I had that were Pakistans or Muslims, I refused to talk to them, and I was ashamed of myself for doing that. I've apologized to them because I realized that, it's not their fault. They have their beliefs as we have our beliefs. I mean, we have terrorists here in America, the KKK, the people that kill the abortion doctors, and, I'm sad with what has happened, but I realize that it's not the Muslims that are doing it. And I hope America keeps their eyes open and educates themselves on the variety of different religions that are in our countries that we aren't familiar with.
Thanks, caller. Professor Forte?
Yes, I think one of the great benefits of the President's policies is that it's permitted and educated Americans to see that Arab Americans and Muslim Americans are truly American. And at the same time, it's been an opportunity for Muslims to affirm the peaceful tradition of their religion and to reject extremists who attempt to hijack their religion or to use some phrases within their religion for their own ends.
Las Vegas, Nevada, you're next. Good morning.
Hi. A couple callers ago on the last subject said that women have many rights. What's your opinion on that?
It varies from Islamic regime to Islamic regime, as it does even in the West and in all areas of the Third World, whether it be Africa or Asia. Now, Muhammad did, when he came to Arabia, that is, when he brought his message to Arabia, change dramatically the place of women in Arabian society. He changed it in terms of their rights in marriage, their rights of property, and their rights to respect and maintenance that had not been there before. He completely outlawed the previous practice of the exposure and the killing of female children. Now today, of course, we have different mores, and various regimes in the Islamic world as well as in Asia and in the West apply these mores differently. Many of the traditions that denigrate the place of women in Islamic societies don't directly come from Islam, but come from tribal traditions. It is such a mixed issue that I would not want to generalize. Nonetheless, it is true that in some Islamic regimes, in Saudi Arabia, for example, the equality and the place of women is not respected, and that's a problem that the West and some of these regimes have to discuss about.
Our next call for Professor Forte comes from Denver, Colorado. Good morning.
Hello?
You're
Yes.
on the air, Denver.
Yes, sir. After Muhammad's death, his followers compiled those of his words regarded as coming directly and literally from God into the Quran, and others of his sayings and teachings and precedents of his personal behavior were recalled by those who knew him during his lifetime, became the Hadith. Together they formed the Sunnah, which is supposed to be the comprehensive guide of the spiritual, ethical, and social life of Orthodox Muslims. What is the Hadith, and does Osama bin Laden reflect that part of the Sunnah?
Thank you. The caller pointed out that there is a kind of a canonical set of traditions derived from Muhammad's actions Orthodox Muslims believe that they are authentic and derived. Many observers of the Islamic tradition think that some of them may not have been directly from the Prophet. These traditions, along with the Quran and other devices, make up the rules that came to be known as Islamic law. Now, some of the Islamic traditions did not recognize Islamic law as the primary source of all behavior. And those traditions are still alive in various elements of the Islamic world. There was a rationalist tradition, there was a tradition that rejected the law and just asked for equality and peaceful behavior among Muslims. The question about the hadith, like biblical questions, is that one can pull quotes and various stories out of the collection of stories regarding the Prophet to serve one's own purposes. And that's what Osama bin Laden does. He picks a few of the stories when Islam was in a situation where it was being attacked by the Meccans, the pagans, and Muhammad called for the defense of Islam. And he extrapolates that into a worldwide campaign against all people who are not Islamic, calling them enemies. So it's a kind of selective use of scripture, selective use of tradition for his own ends. It is not necessarily the true interpretation of what the hadith stands for.
Professor Forte, there's been some talk lately that what Osama bin Laden wants is for the United States to drop its support for Israel in the struggle against the Palestinians, or to remove its military forces from Saudi Arabia. Is that what he wants?
That's the minimum of what he wants. Osama bin Laden is, frankly, just like Lenin or Stalin. You know, one of the things we ought to compare Osama bin Laden to is not just the other traditions of Islam, of which he is quite different, but what he is like compared to other professional terrorists in world histories with whom he has many comparisons and many commonalities. He has an image of world domination that has now gripped him. And so the reduction of United States support for Israel, the removal of United States troops from Saudi Arabia are just propaganda talking points. His image of the world is something that he wants to change entirely to what he wants it to be.
What would it look like if he got his way?
Look at the Taliban and you see what you have.
Our next call for Professor Forte comes from Chicago. Good morning.
Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
I have a couple, just one comment and a question. I look at the Quran from a historical standpoint, and I look back at Richard I, Richard the Lionhearted, King of England, who was over there in 1190, trying to take back or protect Jerusalem after it was taken over by the Christians in, I think, 1090. And Richard I never could figure out how these people could sacrifice their lives for an idea, and that's the problem I have with the Quran, because it appears that it's that this suicide thing, this jihad thing that they have, it's almost like the Japanese during World War II, and it's very anti-Christian or unchristian for people just to sacrifice their lives. Could you explain that for me, please? Thank you very much.
I'll give it a try. Let me talk first about the jihad tradition. The jihad, there is no single jihad tradition in Islam. It is like picking out certain hadiths for whatever one's purpose is that Osama bin Laden is doing. Jihad means struggle. Most Muslims interpret jihad to mean the internal struggle against sin and temptation that one must engage in to become a holy person. It's the same type of struggle any Christian or any Jew engages in if he wishes to become closer to God. Others use the term jihad to mean external warfare in defense of Islam. Osama bin Laden uses jihad to mean aggressive warfare on behalf of the particular and peculiar version of Islam that he espouses. The other point of your question regarded suicide and martyrdom. In all traditions, even in our tradition, there is the justifiable use and sacrifice of one's life for a higher cause. We celebrate the firefighters who went into the World Trade Center knowing that they were risking, in many cases did, give up their lives so that others may live. We celebrate those in the plane that went down in Pennsylvania for sacrificing their lives for others. So martyrdom is not necessarily a peculiar or a strange or an irrational aspect of human behavior. It sometimes can become one of the most noble aspects of human behavior. The key question is, what does one die for? If one dies for the ability to kill innocent civilians, then one is sacrificing one's life for a nefarious purpose. If one dies for the purpose of saving others, then one is dying for a purpose that is noble and godlike.
San Juan, Puerto Rico, good morning.
Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
We're just trying to trash out how does religious beliefs or concept got sucked into the activities of September 12th. Bearing in mind, a few years ago we had a similar explosion at Oklahoma. Timothy McVeigh, a well-decorated serviceman, was convicted and executed for it, an American. How now does it seem that we are rushing to justice, trying to suck bin Laden into this or some other person, using the Oklahoma experience as our yardstick? It was done by an American, or several Americans supported it. Why now are we pointing to Islam/bin Laden for this thing in September?
Caller, may I ask you, do you think that bin Laden was not behind this, or?
Hello?
Caller, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hi, this is the moderator here, and I'm just curious if I could ask you.
What I'm saying, moderator?
Yes.
You hearing me?
Yes.
What I'm saying, sir, logically speaking, within 2 hours of the explosion, we start pointing to bin Laden.
Right.
I think we're narrowing too early. We have to leave no stone unturned. There may be disgruntled persons who are bona fide U.S. citizens of other nations. And I think just to rush into bin Laden with very little evidence, and evidence that sometimes not corroborated. Example, there was a passport found at the scene allegedly intact after the explosion, and there are pictures placed of a Saudi Arabian pilot that is allegedly trained in Florida, and then he appeared to the embassy and said, "This is me. How can I fly a crashed plane and still alive?" There are a lot of holes in the information or intelligence.
Okay, all right, let's get a response. Thank you.
In any situation where you have a perpetrator, an accused perpetrator who has committed a crime, there will always be incomplete aspects to the evidence. People can always find issues regarding the assassination of President Kennedy, President Lincoln, Martin Luther King, to draw away from the primary facts. The fact is that for many years, Osama bin Laden has been making war on the West. He's been making war on Islam. He has been attempting to kill civilians. He has said it is a joyful thing for him to see civilians die. There's not much more evidence we need to know about this man and his plans for us in regard to the Taliban, in regard to what he almost certainly did in terms of the United States in the World Trade Center. To try to shave and say, well, we need more evidence now, is simply putting a blind eye to the facts. This man is evil, and it's time that we got him, frankly.
David Forte grew up in Somersville, Massachusetts. He's got degrees from Harvard, Manchester University in England, the University of Toronto, and Columbia University. He is, as we said earlier, a law professor at Cleveland State University. He's also been chief counsel to the U.S. delegation to the United Nations in 1985 and 1986 when Jeane Kirkpatrick was the representative there. And my question to you, David Forte, is how did you come to have this interest and fascination with Islam?
Oh, it's a very simple story, and it's not particularly exciting. I'm an academic. I love ideas. My primary area of study is constitutional law. My other area of study is theory and jurisprudence and natural law. But when I was at Columbia, a wonderful place to be at law school, they had a wonderful program in comparative law. So I took courses in ancient Roman law, Islamic law, Chinese law, and Russian law. And I wrote, I think, a pretty nice paper in some of those courses, one of which in Islamic law became published. And later when I went into teaching, people saw this paper and began to ask me to present other papers in Islamic law. Fascinating and great legal system, one of the great ones in world history. And so I began publishing, and then soon I began teaching it. And as people say, the rest is academic history.
I'm going to ask you an unfair question. Can you summarize the differences between Islamic law and the law we're used to in the United States in, I won't say 25 words or less, but can you give us just a feel?
Now, this is a real challenge. Islamic law in many areas was very highly developed and half a millennium ahead of the English common law, for example. In commercial law and the law of property, it was very developed in the law of succession, that is, wills and so forth. In criminal law, it was never very highly developed. And it wasn't highly developed because in early Islamic history, which many fundamentalists do not acknowledge today in Islam, in early Islamic history and all through the history of Islam, it was granted that whenever the state needed a policy that differed from the Sharia, the sacred law of Islam, all they needed to do, and they legitimately could do it, was remove the Qadi from jurisdiction over an area and set up state courts. And that's exactly what the early empire did in regard to criminal law and to many other areas of the law. And so when the legalists developed the law, they did not have much experience with criminal jurisdiction because it had been taken away from them by the caliphs and the sultans and the other leaders of Islam through the centuries. So today when modern fundamentalists want to reestablish Islamic law and they turn to the criminal law, what they're actually doing is establishing a part of the law, in fact, part of the least developed of this wonderful, sophisticated legal system, which even the early Islamic State very often ignored.
Our next call for Professor David Forte comes from San Francisco. Good morning.
How's it going? My question is, how do you justify? I understand what you said about Islam, but you know, putting it all in perspective, Christianity throughout its history has done the exact same thing that Islam has done. You know, basically judging people, even back as so recently as Salem witch trials, for example, judging people upon religious attributes, whether they're guilty or not. And it's like, I mean, I said this earlier to somebody I was talking to tonight. It's like America is so powerful. They're like, if we just even pat someone on the back, they're going to fall over backwards because we're so powerful. America is the empire, and what a nudge or a wink from us is it's a strike. You know, it's knocking all 10 pins down. And it's like, yes, we take great comfort in our freedom and everything, but what I'm saying is, basically, it's like, we're so comfortable in being able to have the ability to, you know, as we're doing now, discuss these things and, you know, whatnot, whatever, but we are coming from and especially you, as you were saying, the first three comments that you made tonight were like, oh, President Bush is great and this and doing this, and I'm not criticizing the president at all, but basically what I'm saying is like, where do we start at some point looking at ourselves, because we are...
Okay, caller, let's get a response. Thanks.
Well, let's get some clarity of moral thought in this regard. Salem witch trials occurred many centuries ago. Christianity had its dark moments. Islam has had its dark moments. In that, you are correct. What bin Laden represents is an aspect of world history that we've seen in other cultures. We've seen it as an expression of socialism into Marxism. We've seen it as an expression of racial studies into Nazism. Bin Laden represents a theory of history that all religions regard as evil, simply evil. And the fact that the United States now stands against evil, even though we have a conflicted history ourselves, does not mean our quest is in any way compromised. If you want to see the real America, not academic criticisms of America, if you want to see the real America, look at the firefighters who saved the people in the World Trade Center. Look at the people who went to church and to their mosques and to their temples after the tragedy. That's the real America. That's the America that stands for the moral goodness. And we can put aside certain academic criticisms in times like this.
Danbury, Connecticut, you're next for Professor David Forte.
Yep.
Go right ahead. Danbury, are you there? You're on the air.
Yeah. I want to know the question about the jihad this morning was explaining, and the word terror, where is come from?
The word jihad, caller, you want to know the derivation of the word jihad?
Word jihad, this is Islam allow about the jihad, but jihad is against if somebody try to take away your rights, take away, destroy your freedom, try to destroy against your religion, then the word jihad come in Quran. And then the second thing was the word terrorist. What is a terrorist from? What is the basic of terrorist? I think the media is just making Islam bad, giving a bad name of the women. In the Islam, the women have the best respect. There's no racism for the woman. The woman is as a mother, the woman as a sister, woman is have respect as a daughter.
Caller, can I just interrupt for 2 seconds and ask you a quick question? The people who hijack the airplanes, because there has been some back and forth among the press about whether to call those people terrorists in print accounts, in news stories. Is it fair to call them terrorists?
Yeah, we call them terrorists, but there is the reason to call them the terrorists. Why did they do it? Is anybody explain on the media why these people do it?
Okay, thanks. Let's get Professor Forte to respond to that.
They were terrorists. Well, let's get a definition of terror. There's a difference, actually, between terror and terrorists, although terrorists use terror. Terror is a situation in which you are placed in a panic that limits your ability to function. Certain acts of terror are actually quite legitimate. When the police overwhelm a criminal and have him put down his gun, for example, in the middle of a robbery, the criminal may be very terrorized in the sense that he doesn't want to lose his life. When in a legitimate war one bombs an enemy, the soldiers are terrorized. That's not terrorism. Terrorism is the concerted, planned attack on civilians for the sake of political gain. It is designed to undermine the will of a society, to break down its structures so that a small group, a terroristic group, whether it be the Bolsheviks in Russia or the Nazis in Germany or bin Laden in Afghanistan, can take over the society and wreak their will as they want. That's what terrorism is, and that's what we had in the World Trade Center. To try to say that it was somehow something else, I think, is simply not facing the facts as they are.
What about the word jihad?
The word jihad I've explained before. The word jihad means struggle. Most Muslims say it means struggle for a moral purpose. There is a tradition which is very conflicted of it being used in many ways for military campaigns. Some Islamic leaders have called for jihads when they simply wanted to extend their realm without legitimately using it according to even Islamic law. So there's no way to say that there is a legitimate or illegitimate jihad consistently within Islam because Muslims themselves have used it in conflicting ways.
Troy, Michigan, you're next. Good morning.
Yes, I have a question about the situation in Middle East and in relation to Islam. Now, what we see, the human civilization got all its revelation through the Middle Eastern source. Abraham, the grand prophet, his land was Iraq, which is in destruction by the secular West. And then the other source is Israel itself, that we see what is going on there. And the third is Saudi Arabia, where the secular West is again trying to intervene and change the laws. I think the problem that's happening is the fight between the commands of God and all the enlightenment that came through God versus what the secular is trying to bring into the world, namely the homosexuality, abortion, and whatnot.
Okay, caller, let's get a response. Thanks.
The caller is making 2 points that I understand. One I agree with and one I disagree with. One point is that secularism becomes a kind of religion in itself. And I think one of the ways the West has not appreciated the traditions of Islam is that we have tended to denigrate religion even in our own area. Christians, according to secular agnostics in our country, are somehow crazy people, people who shouldn't be taken seriously. Religion is something that should be practiced very privately. It shouldn't inform the public policy of a country. I'm pleased to see that under the current administration, there's a greater respect for religion, both Christian and Islamic, as well as Judaic. There's a greater respect for religion as the underpinning of a society, not necessarily dictating the details of the law, but as a moral underpinning by which a society can function in a productive and in a peaceful way. The second point the gentleman made had to do with secularism and Iraq and secularism and Saudi Arabia. And the premise of that question, I think, was incorrect. Islam has wreaked more destruction upon itself with the invasions of the Turks, the Mongols who converted to Islam, than the West has ever done to Islam. And the fact of the matter is that Saddam Hussein is a dictator who has hurt the Iraqi people more than the West have ever hurt the Iraqi people, including the sanctions. He's a tyrant. He has killed tens of thousands of Iraqis. He's used poison gas on Iraqi citizens. And so to say that the West is somehow at blame for what's happening to Iraq, I think, has the moral equation backwards. Regarding Saudi Arabia, the caller said that the Saudi Arabian law is being attempted to be changed by the West. Saudi Arabia is a puritanical regime that came to power earlier in this century following the Wahhabi movement of 3 centuries ago. It's a particular form of Islam. It is not necessarily the dominant form of Islam. It is stricter than most Muslims would have practice. And the fact that Saudi Arabia itself has decided to modernize its law shows that Islam is and normally has been open to developmental changes in its law to meet current events.
Professor Forte, quick question. There's a story about you in the Washington Post on the 26th of this month, a little earlier, under the headline, Professor Shapes Bush Rhetoric. Quick question here is that early on the Bush administration was using the word crusade to describe its struggle against Osama bin Laden, and I believe you advised them that was a bad idea. Why?
Other people advised them of that, and it was a bad idea, but it's in the past, and I think we can leave it there. Americans use the word crusade in a much more parochial and colloquial way. We use it when we're talking about sports events. And of course, it has a provenance in World War II, when Eisenhower called World War II the Great Crusade. So it was an easy thing to use it as a generic term. We didn't realize that it had become sensitive in Muslim eyes actually recently. The Crusades were not a particularly successful invasion of the Muslims, and the Muslim historians of the time didn't pay much attention to them because it didn't do much. They only got within 50 miles of the coast along the Eastern Mediterranean, and they just became a set of principalities when Islam itself was pretty much divided up into a set of principalities. But later it's been turned into somewhat of a propaganda issue of an attack on Islam, as the First Crusade particularly was, and it has bad connotations. So it's a word that should not be used, but it's in the past and we need not to bring that up now.
All right, Santa Cruz, California, you're next for Professor David Forte.
Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Todd Cleveland, and I've actually never been to Cleveland, but I'm really familiar with the name itself. And there's another really ironic thing is that I was born on September 11th, 1972, in fact. Barry hit number 72, Barry Bonds, Giants, tonight. But I have really a lot of questions here. I've been following this since day one. I feel like maybe obviously my heart goes out to all the victims and the losses that we've had. Basically, my quick question that I had for you was, in your professional opinion, where do you see the world or the United States in, let's say, 10 years from now, as this progresses into attacks on each other?
I'd be happy to talk about that. Actually, compared to many people that I've spoken to, I'm very optimistic. And I think most Americans are actually optimistic. They're apprehensive because we've been attacked in our homeland and we may very well be attacked again. But look what's happened. Americans have joined together as they have not joined together in half a century. They've repaired to their churches, synagogues, and mosques because they understand that God is the source of all goodness, and they are facing something that is purely evil. Beyond all politics, beyond all religions, what's happened simply is evil, and God is the source of good. At the same time, Americans have begun to appreciate all religions, including Islam, in its peaceful aspect. And so what this does is open up the chance, pardon me, open up a chance of a rapprochement between the West and the Third World as we begin to appreciate the religious traditions of the Third World and not to denigrate religion as we sometimes have done in the past.
We've got about 10 more minutes with Professor David Forte in Cleveland, and our next call for him comes from Alexandria, Virginia. Good morning.
Hi, I'm a born and raised American, Irish-German descent who is engaged to be married to a Saudi American. And the whole principle of women being treated subservient and neglected and abused is absolutely ridiculously insane. If you look at the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, you do not see homeless people like you see here in the United States. If you ask the Saudi woman or women from a lot of the Middle Eastern cultures, if they want Western ways, they don't want them. They're happy the way they are. They don't feel that their rights are being taken away in any way, shape, or form. There are Saudi women. There was a Saudi woman at the UN who was one of the chief counsels for the Saudi delegation. Women in Saudi Arabia are some of the wealthiest people due to the inheritance laws. Women are educated in Saudi Arabia. They're educated overseas. Look at Queen Noor. She's a perfect example of a person from our ways that became, for all practical purposes, an person from Arabia and Muslim culture. It's not restrictive. The reason that they ask you to cover yourself is so that people look at the real you, not at your physical beauty, and it's to protect you. If you look at the crime rate in Saudi Arabia, most of the crime committed is by foreigners. It's not by their own people. They are coming into the modern age, and you're right, it's because Islam allows for change and flexibility. But the world has to start looking at things as a whole and not in little bits and pieces.
Caller, quick question. Again, this has come up again and again and again, but the idea of women not being allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia, does that trouble you at all? Or?
No, it's really meant for your own safety, because when you're covered, it's hard to see. Not to mention the fact that it's a safety issue. They want to treat their women with the utmost respect and not put them in danger in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, thank you. Professor Forte?
Well, that's a statement of opinion of this woman, which I think we should respect. In many areas of the Islamic world, there are no problems of women being educated and filling roles that they would in the West. In some other areas, they are denigrated, but I think primarily from tribal customs, not from Islam. Although it must be said that Saudi Arabia is not the gentle regime and the gentle society completely that the column may lead us to believe. It is very harsh towards people who wish, to all those millions of workers there who wish even privately to practice their own religion. There are certain aspects and harshness of their prison system that need to be brought to light and corrected. So not all is peaceful and calm in Saudi Arabia.
Newport Beach, California. Good morning. You're next.
Yes, good morning. I really appreciate this show. My question is, when bin Laden's family, these Saudi ambassadors, said they had to leave, FBI took them to Houston, I believe, and they all flew out, which for their own safety. But why have I not heard any condemnation from their son or brothers about, you know, what he has done? And the second is just a point. If he is ever captured, I don't believe he should have the death penalty. I believe he should just have a sex change and send him back to the Taliban.
I don't think I'll answer either questions. The first one I don't know the answer to because I don't know the situation regarding the relations of him to his family. And the second I take is simply a joke.
All right, we'll just let that one go. Morro Bay, California. Good morning. You're next.
Good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN. My question is in this country we have traditions too, and one of them is military. The blacks came out in the Civil War, the Japanese in World War II. Where have our Arab brothers been over the years?
Where, in what respect, caller?
Military history. Have they fought for this country in any way, shape, or form ever? And where are they now?
All right.
I don't hear any big thing coming on about enlistments of Arab youth. Like to know why.
Let's find out.
As I was sitting here waiting to come on, I heard one of the callers talk about, I believe on the previous show, that his brother had joined the Army, enlisted in the Army. I think Arab Americans are getting to be quite prominent in the Army, and they're going to be recruited because we're going to need them in fighting terrorists abroad. I have no reason to doubt that loyal Arab Americans are going to be quite a number of American military heroes in the next few months.
You know, there's an article here, and we can't show it to you on the air, but I wanted to get the chance to read quickly from it. This is on the front page of the Washington Post this morning. It's under the headline, and Professor Forte, I wanted to get your reaction too, and tell us what it's like in Cleveland. I'll read very quickly here. Shortly after last month's terrorist attacks, 2 bricks ferried handwritten notes with crude racist remarks through the front window of the Old Town Islamic bookstore in Alexandria. Store manager Hazim Barakat was angry and frazzled. The Palestinian immigrant was also unprepared for what happened next. About 15 bouquets of flowers and more than 50 cards, some with money, arrived at his store. People from as far away as Tennessee and Nebraska called with condolences. A local businessman who would not give Barakat his name paid for a new window. Christian ministers and a rabbi dropped by to express their support. Quote, "The people in the neighborhood were so nice you don't believe," said Barakat, who's 44 years old and runs the store for the American Muslim Foundation. "This is like another family I have. This is my big family. I want to thank everybody." Terrorism and bigotry, it seems, can have unintended consequences. Across the Washington area and the nation, many Muslims say that since September 11th, they have been encouraged and comforted by unexpected acts of kindness from communities and individuals. In subdivisions, stores, restaurants, and offices, non-Muslims have approached them with hugs, handshakes, moral support, even the sanctuary of their own homes, as well as apologies for attacks by others. Professor Forte, does that sound like anything that's going on in Cleveland as well or not?
Well, you see, this policy that the president put forward, which is we now slice off and draw a bright line between those who practice violence in the name of religion and those who follow the true peaceful tenets of religion, is beginning to have a marvelous effect on our society as a whole. People are reaching out to Arabs and Muslims. Arabs and Muslims are now speaking out against terrorism. And I think it's a very hopeful sign of a joining together of our society that is long overdue.
Our last call for Professor Forte comes from Dallas, Texas. Good morning.
Good morning. This is the first time I've ever called, and I'm grateful for C-SPAN, and I'm going to lower my TV because I can hear myself. But I've watched your programs very much, and I think it's a very informative program. And Professor Forte, I am so amazed and happy to see that someone finally is coming out and really explaining the situation that people from the Islamic world are not all terrorists. Terrorism, I come from I had terrorism placed upon me as a child. I know what terrorism is like. This situation here in this country, I thought I was safe when I came to the United States, and I'm not anymore. My question to you is not to explain anything about Islam or anything. Since you have worked with President Bush a lot, is the United States going to at least bring forth or put into our society, I know it's a free society, some more laws or protectiveness for us in the example of people coming in? For example, when I came to this country back in the 60s, I came in as a political refugee, and but I was very scrutinized. My family was very scrutinized. When I was a younger person and I traveled from the United States to Europe a lot, the immigration office constantly, I mean, they had copies of letters that I sent to my mother. One time when I was a little bit older and I was traveling to Canada back and forth, I came in and out of Canada without any papers, a driver's license. Is the United States going to tighten the immigration of just people coming in, criminals from other countries? Because the terrorists that are coming in and out are not, they're not, I know, I have to be very careful. They're criminals. They're not, they don't respect other people's lives. What is the United States going to do in reference to this problem, and is it going to be for a long period of time, or is it just going to be for 6 months?
Thanks, caller.
I don't know the answer to what the United States is going to do, but I have an opinion. I have worked in a number of cases on people who've sought political asylum for religious reasons, and I have had to fight against the State Department. We have had a very strange immigration policy where we've been very reluctant to grant political asylum in some cases for fear of embarrassing our relations with the foreign government, but at the same time being very casual about letting people in across the borders, either legally or illegally. And the administration is changing so many things that's going to make things better for our country, but we've got a long way to go. You know, we've had 10 years or more of neglect of intelligence, of development of the military, of border controls. And, you know, Americans can get spoiled and say, well, nothing's bad for us now in 1990, 92, 94. But these things come back to haunt us. And so we have a window of vulnerability over the next 2, 4, 6 years in terms of chemical warfare protection, in terms of border controls. And we have to quickly fill that window, close that window as much as we can, as quickly as we can, with long-term solutions so that this country cannot be made the victim of terrorism in the future.
Professor David Forte, who's been helpful to the Bush administration in shaping their thinking about Islam, thanks very much for being with us this morning on C-SPAN.
Glad to be here.
And a couple of notes for our viewers and our listeners. Later on today at 1:15 Eastern Time, Tony Blair, Prime Minister Tony Blair of England, will be on C-SPAN speaking to the Labour Party conference about defending the homeland and their alliance with the United States. After that, America in the Courts tonight at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Chief Justice William Rehnquist will talk about his book, All the Laws But One, Civil Liberties in Wartime, his analysis of the balance between government interests and individual civil liberties during wartime. After that, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor will address the New York University Law School at the groundbreaking ceremony of their new building in Manhattan and reflect on the American spirit after seeing the ruins of the World Trade Center. Following that, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, in his address earlier this week to the United Nations, speaking to the UN General Assembly meeting on terrorism, about New York's experience and recovery efforts and what he considers the proper response to that. Tomorrow morning on C-SPAN's Washington Journal, Jeffrey Rosen, he's a contributor to the New York Times Magazine. He'll be talking about civil liberties and terrorism. Arnaud de Bourgrave, President and CEO of the United Press International. He's just back from Pakistan and Afghanistan and will also talk about his interview with the head of the Taliban this past June. And John Pike, he's director of globalsecurity.org, and he'll be talking about the U.S. military's surveillance and communication intelligence hardware. And speaking of hardware, military hardware, in our next hour coming up, we'll be joined by John Donnelly. He's editor of Defense Week. We'll be talking about military hardware. All that coming up. We'll be right back.
Tonight on America and the Courts, Chief Justice William Rehnquist